and welcome to Awakening Through Love, the podcast. My name's Rod Gordon, and
My name's Martina Hughes, and today we're doing part two of Who is Rod Gordon? Exploring Rod's life, his journey to now, and what's behind his life and what's brought him to where he is now to be a relationship and intimacy teacher. So there was a question I forgot last week and it feels important. So the question is, do you feel it's possible for everyone to have an awakening experience?
yeah, yes, I do. Like 100%. Anybody can have one in any moment of the day, whether they're someone who's practicing and intentionally seeking out that experience, but also, too, it's the experiences themselves aren't the most important piece. In some ways, they can be a hindrance. The an awakening experience is a really beautiful important moment, and not everybody has those types of experiences. And to measure our path of awareness or awakeness like through the experiences that we have in many ways is a trap, because we get attached to experience. If your experience is better than my experience, then I'm not as awakened as you are. And that straight away is a recreation of a self or the ego in the moment. Even just in saying that and viewing it from that point of view, it's like it creates a self in the moment of that experience. And so anybody can awaken is probably more the message that I have. Like I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it really matters like who you are, what you're doing, what your job is. You could be anyone doing any career, and you can awaken as a human being. Through our humanity is the pathway, to awaken. And so I think the experiences themselves are less important,
Mm-hmm.
and that awakening is more important. And
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like in many ways is really human and practical and down to earth. And it's not esoteric and spiritual. It can be it can be measured very easily. The more awake a person is, the more loving they are as a human. And the truth is, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done, what you've said, the people you've hurt, how hurt you've been, the experiences you've had, what you've done to others. None of that matters. What matters is, like, from wherever you are right now in this moment, can you become more loving as a human? Can
Mm-hmm.
you take a step towards that and the best measurement is other people. If other people notice that you're more loving or you're more generous or there's something's changed about you, then you can pretty much guarantee that something's changed. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, that's what an awakening feels like. It feels like something in our awareness changes. We become more aware. That's like the first part. The second part is, can we embody and live that and then abide in that state? Like, can we live from that point of view? Can we live from that new awareness day in and day out? And really, particularly when we don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
like if someone's being hurtful or nasty or aggressive, can we still respond from a place of love? Or do we contract back into that habitual pattern of reactivity?
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't fall into that reactivity, then something in us has awakened and become
Mm-hmm.
more aware. And we have grown, spiritually, we've grown in awareness, we've grown as in our humanity as a human.
So that gives everyone something that they can even feel into for their lives if they're curious about awakening, like how they can show up and be more loving and not be, learn how to overcome the moments of reactivity.
Yeah. And like the way we notice, like there's a difference. Like it's very easy to go straight to spiritual
Mm,
bypassing,
mm-hmm,
where we skip over our feelings and go, no, I can't react. I have to behave this way.
mm,
And that's not it.
yeah.
That's a way to breed resentment in the body, and at some point that person will blow up, or their behavior will leak out sideways, the
Yes.
resentment and the aggression that builds in the body. And so it has to come from a place of awareness.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is we start to see, if someone's being aggressive towards us at first, like for me, like there's the reactive part would be, oh, well, I'm going to be more aggressive back to shut
Mm-hmm.
down this aggression because I don't want to experience it. I feel vulnerable and I'm scared and I'm hurt and I'm afraid and I don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to feel that way. It's really uncomfortable. So that would be the initial, impulse in my body. But then if I approached it from a space of greater awareness, what that moment would look like, persons being aggressive, say, towards me, those feelings would arise in my body still. That doesn't change, but I'd recognize them and go, there's that part of me that wants to react. That part of me, I feel scared right now. Oh, I'm hurting. I feel vulnerable. And it's like then looking at the other person, it's like, what's happening for them in this moment?
Mm.
Here's a person that's hurting so much or so afraid that they're being aggressive.
Mm.
They're suffering in some way in this moment that's causing them to react really strongly.
Mm.
And it's like, wow, there's a human in front of me that's hurting. How do I show up to that in a way that's more loving? And so that's what I mean by through awareness.
Yeah.
We have to become more aware. So there's aware of self and our own feelings and reactivity, but then it's at a capacity to be aware enough to actually allow our body to feel, because feelings really only need to be felt. And so to feel that and then to be aware enough to go, okay, so that's what's happening in my body. This is what's happening with my emotions. So mentally, I'm actually aware. And we're starting to engage all the different layers of our humanity. So if we can engage with our body, the sensations that are arising, the feelings that are in our body, the emotions that are arising, our own mental thoughts and stories that are spinning of like, oh, I'm not good enough. This person's, if I don't shut this down, I'm weak, I'm whatever. Like recognize our own habitual thought
Mm.
patterns and then engaging with ourselves as love. So from the spiritual point of view, so we've got body, emotions, mind, and spiritual, the awareness piece. So when we can engage on all levels of our humanity and be with our experience, we start to recognize what makes up the self, all these different layers, how they relate to each other, how thoughts create feelings, feelings create thoughts, all these both create sensations and reactions in the body. And can we be with all that in the moment and then recognize, how do I show up as love in this moment?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how do I be with this person who's being aggressive?
Yes.
So instead of acting aggressive to them, I might be like, I can see something's happening right now. I feel scared and vulnerable, but I don't know how to communicate with you, but I
Mm.
really want to engage.
Yeah.
So I can just say or be or do something that's not the reactive habitual pattern.
Mm.
And that in itself is awakening,
Yes.
because we're taking the awareness that we have, recognizing the feelings and the sensations in the body, the emotions, allowing ourselves to be with that, but not allowing any of those experiences to govern or determine how we behave as a human,
Mm.
allowing the awareness that we have to dictate who we are, to live in alignment with our values and our belief systems so deeply that it can't be derailed by how another shows up. And it's that experience that will determine how awakened we are. And
Mm.
anybody can do that, but we can't force it. It's an effortless allowing that arises through awareness,
Mm.
and the cultivating of awareness is specifically going to come through practice. If we haven't had an abiding awakening, where like someone like Eckhart Tolle, who has this huge intense awakening experience and then never gets pulled magnetically back into his human habitual reactivity, whereas
Mm.
most people who have an awakening experience will come back to themselves.
Mm.
And that in itself can be really disorientating and confusing. In
Mm.
some ways it's its own form of hell, because the mind or the awareness says, I know a better way to be, and no matter what I do, I can't live it. And I've
Mm.
had various iterations of that throughout my life, of becoming aware and not being able to embody it or live it authentically. And that is absolutely torturous.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And
Yes. So anyone can awaken, anyone
yes.
can have an awakening
Yeah.
experience. It doesn't there.
Yeah.
It's not a special thing. It's
Mm.
it's it's available to any human.
Yeah. And I really just want to highlight something from what you've said of like being loving, not being something that gets plastered over the top of uncomfortable and difficult feelings that in actual fact that really, what you're describing in there so much about being with our feelings, no matter how difficult and uncomfortable and tough they are, to like really being able to be with those feelings is also part of the journey of awakening. We're not painting love over the top of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's like, it's common to believe, and it's definitely been my experience, that if I'm, angry, that, anger is like present in my body.
Mm.
And that's true. And as sensitivity comes online and awareness builds in the being, in the human, what also happens is the recognition of other feelings and emotions that are present with anger. So, like, two key ones are fear and sadness, because anger can't literally exist on its own. But then there's the fear and the sadness. But then it's great to recognize that. But then if we become even more sensitive, we can actually feel love present at the same time as all these emotions. So it doesn't have to be separate. Our experience tends to separate it out because we're only aware of the most intense and strong emotion that's arising in the moment. But as we become more sensitive, we can sense that there's other ones present at the same time. And so, anger, for example, is not separate from love.
Mm.
There's no need to paste love over it or pretend, because it's actually there. It's just love arising in the moment as anger. Then
Yes.
how do we show that through the body with the love present?
Mhm.
So anger expressed with love is actually, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's no longer a destructive force.
It's been such a challenge for me to be able to allow anger to be there with an open heart, because there's almost a reflex inside that wants to go, oh, I'm angry, so then push you away or push someone away or push everyone away in some instances. There's very much my habit was, if I'm angry, to then hide and run away and try and like pretend I wasn't angry, or just be angry on my own and not let anybody see it. But
Mm.
to actually learn how to feel anger and the intensity of it, and keep my heart open to feel that, oh, I can be angry and love can be here, has been a liberating experience.
Absolutely, and I think you're speaking to something that's really important to understand. And there's two really specific qualities of the self or the ego, the mechanism of how it plays out. And two of those qualities are attack and defend.
Mm,
And that as soon as anger arises, the impulse to defend comes online, and that's where I think that separation and pullback comes back, where
mm,
we separate love from the anger in that moment. It it allows it allows it to be experienced as separate. And that contraction or that separation that happens when we attack or defend is a real definition of, it's how we can become aware of how aware we are in the moment. If
mm,
I catch myself attacking, if I catch myself defending, it tells me that, I'm actually not being as aware as I want right now.
mm,
I'm in a habitual mode of behavior. I need to pause, take a breath, check in. Is this who I really want to be? And make an adjustment.
mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Whilst we're talking about strong emotions and reactivity, it feels like a good segue to tap into one of the things I want to explore with you today.
Mm.
We spoke last week about the accident that Rod had 5.5 years ago, and how much it caused him pain and a lot of difficult times. One of the things that happened during that period was that I noticed you really struggling to regulate your emotions.
Mm.
And there was a sense of your emotions. Yeah, I recognized that something felt different about how you processed your emotions compared to how I do. And so I started bringing up with you that maybe it would be good for you to do some testing with a clinical psychologist around autism. Would you like to share with people where that journey went for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because after the accident, I was really reactive. like super reactive. But it was like when I was a kid. I felt the strength and intensity of my emotions, and I couldn't be with them. I could. It was so overwhelming to my whole body. It's like I didn't. I had no sense of um, pardon me, who I was, who I'd become, how I got there. Everything. It was kind of like a factory reset on a phone or a computer.
What a great description.
Yeah, it was like everything got deleted. And so you thought had some kind of autism.
Yeah.
And my sensitivity was really high. Like I couldn't walk in shopping centers, I couldn't be around sound, like no music or anything like that. It would just totally overstimulate my body. And so we went to the clinical psychologist because I think the pain management clinic recommended it because we bought what was happening to them, and you shared with the lead guy there, and the psychologist there recommended clinical psychologists for testing. And so we went to her and we started doing the clinical psychology test around um, autism. And I think you had to get like 50 out of 100 to be on the spectrum, and I got like 48. So I'm like right there. So
And there were a lot of tests. Like it took weeks to do the
yeah,
tests and fill in forms. So it was very comprehensive.
yeah, it was really complex. It was a really deep dive into it. So I'm definitely right up there and really close, and have lots of qualities and aspects of that, but not quite
Mm.
on the spectrum. But it is a spectrum, so I don't know how that works. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's probably one time I was glad to get 48% on a test, because there's been lots of times I've got 48% on tests and it hasn't been great. But during that, what became clear to her was there was something else present. And so I'd become aware that I was dyslexic, which I didn't know. Um, so we explored that. But it was ADHD. So she started doing she started doing a test for ADHD, and she wouldn't finish it because, and I was really pissed because I was the first time I was getting, like, not maybe not the first time, but one of the very few times in my life where I was getting 100% for a test. And there's a part of me, and I can even feel it now, that was super excited to be getting 100% on a test, despite the context of the test. It was exciting to be doing well because academically I've really struggled with school and stuff like that. Like I failed school literally. I had E's and F's for some of my classes. I had A's and B's for music and graphics. So I was clearly artistic, but academic I am not.
Mm. It was such a, I remember that moment so clearly. Like she's going down the ADHD questions and Rod's yes, 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 yes. She got to the end of the first page and she goes, okay, we don't need to finish that. And Rod's like, but hang on, I'm going really well. I want to keep going. And she's like, it's conclusive. You have ADHD.
Yeah, and so they didn't have that around when I was a kid, so I didn't really know much about it. But then it just sort of like, all the things started landing in my head of like, oh yeah, right, this is why like I couldn't sit still as a kid. This is why I had trouble focusing my attention at school on things I really wasn't interested in. But anything I was really interested in, I could hyper focus. And it's really interesting because I always thought ADHD meant that there was some kind of deficiency in a person's capacity to pay attention, but it's not quite accurate. There's if I'm not interested in the subject or the topic, it's almost impossible for me to keep my attention on it. My attention constantly drifts somewhere else. But if there is something that I'm deeply passionate about, I can place my attention on it for hours. So it's a
And
really
days and
paradoxical.
weeks and months, just to be really clear.
Okay, I can be obsessive. It probably defines it much more accurately. Yeah, obsessive. So it was an interesting
Mm,
paradox to recognize within my being,
mm,
of and to understand my childhood and my challenges that I had. But there was a lot more that actually came out of it. Like I started to do some research and listen to some podcasts and listen to some people with experience around ADHD, and there was a woman that we listened to. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but we should share a link to it because it's really good.
Mm.
But one of the things about ADHD is that the person with ADHD, so say me in this case, is the intensity of the sensitivity and the emotional experience. So when an emotion arises in my body, it's so intense and so uncomfortable to actually be with that I'll naturally want to react to it. So kids with ADHD or adults with ADHD can be really reactive. And part of that is the overload on the nervous system, the sensitivity. And there was more to it, but I can't remember what I was going to say. There was something else about the sensitivity. It's the experience is like I did hear it described, but it's like the volume's been turned right up. But there's also a sense that there's also no pathway out. It's very hard for people with ADHD to shift their attention from one thing to another. So if something's happening, that's very hard for them to then shift their attention away from it. They'll keep coming back, coming back. There's that obsessive quality of where I just want to pull my attention back to that thing. So it's very hard to let go of something.
Mm.
And there was a really beautiful description of this woman's experience, which is definitely my experience. But if I walk into a room full of people, I can feel what's happening in each person's body. I can feel their relationship to themselves, their relationship to each other, their relationship to me. But that data doesn't just come in nice little dribs and drabs and it just become beautifully aware. It just all comes in at once.
Mm.
So how that feels is like overload. If it
Mm.
feels like overwhelming, intense experience of like, I don't know what's happening right now.
Mm.
So once she explained that, that gave me really good understanding of like how I experienced the world. And because I'd actually not intentionally, but I actually used to hairdress from that place. And so
Mm.
it was, I realized at some point in my life, like in my 20s, that whatever emotion I could feel in my own body, I could actually feel in another person's body. And so the more that I practiced feeling my emotions and the stronger emotions that arose, the more I could actually feel that and be with that in another person.
Mm.
And from a science point of view, it's to do with the mirror neurons in the front surface of the body and that how they read another person's body. I don't know the full scientific study behind it, but scientists are studying that type of thing. But it's related to that. So that
Mm.
capacity is really heightened in someone with ADHD. And so for me, like with the work that I did, like especially as a hairdresser, but then now, working in the relationship and intimacy space, I can sit down in front of another human and feel exactly what's happening in their body and help them understand their experience and what's happening. And which is a really, for me, a beautiful gift to be able to offer somebody.
Mm.
Because I know for me, that experience throughout my life has been absolute torture,
Yes.
especially like in relationships with friends. I'd be sitting in front of them and they'd be like, I'm so angry and pissed off about this. And I said, yeah, but no, you're sad and you're scared and you're this. And it's like, here I was with this, you know, brutal, forceful way of, and people like, no, that's not true. And like, 4 weeks later, they might have that same experience of like, I do feel that way. It's like, but it was that invalidation of that experience
Mm.
that happened over and over and over again. I just thought I was crazy because I
Mm.
had these sensations in my body. I could feel what was happening. And they were like, no, that's not true for me. And I'm like, oh, what is wrong with me?
Mm.
But then, when I look back, in some ways, like how I was abusive because being so forceful and telling someone their experience is just so abrupt and rude and inconsiderate and insensitive.
Mm.
And so I didn't have the awareness to use it as a skill. It's like a child running around with a sword. It's dangerous
Yeah, ran reckless. Yeah.
and reckless.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was as or, as I became older, and I studied a lot when I was hairdressing, and so I at some point recognized that it was a gift that actually needs to be used really with great sensitivity and
Mm.
care and greater curiosity, not
Mm.
brute force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I remember reading about ADHD is about how for somebody with ADHD, it feels like there's a motor running inside constantly.
Mm.
And I remember
Mm.
checking in with you and you saying to me, yeah, that's how it feels. And
Yeah.
given that before before the accident, you were hairdressing, motorbike riding, studying, having a relationship, being a dad. Like your life was like really full. So that motor was like fully engaged.
Yeah.
But then post accident, there was like no capacity to do anything with all of that energy running in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at some point, I had the experience like my teacher contacted and reached out and wanted me to be a part of this men's group that he was creating. And, that required me to meditate every day. I was like, no fucking way I was going to meditate, for ADHD because like the whole concept just used to torture me.
Mm,
And so it was that process though that's actually slowed that feeling of that motor down. Like it's still present. It feels like I wake up and it's racing, but
mm.
it's also like I can now actually be with that racy, motory feeling that's running in my belly.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And I know when we were speaking about this a couple of weeks ago, Rod said he used to think everybody else was like lazy and slack and had no energy because he was always so busy and so doing like 100 things at once.
Yeah, because and like to make things happen in my life, it was like it's just simple. It's like this is what I want to do. Right, go and do it. And other people would want things and want to achieve things and then they weren't. I was like, oh my God, they're just so lazy. Why don't you just go out there and get this done?
Mm,
But that motor, that energy to do, in lots of ways, it fueled really lots of beautiful experiences in my life.
yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. And it feels like with what you've just described that you've been able to turn it around so that now know how to be with your sensitivity, but also then using that sensitivity to tune into people when working with clients.
Yeah. It's like taking what's there that looks like, a hindrance or something that should be medicated or whatever. And like, how do I use this as a gift? How do I be of service, like, to myself and others in a way that this becomes something that increases the value in someone's life, increases the love that they experience. And so there's a lot of beauty about ADHD, and in some ways it's a superpower.
Mm, mm,
Yeah,
beautiful. And so I imagine that when you were a hairdresser, then having ADHD is almost like the perfect career for a hairdresser. Oh,
absolutely.
I said that the wrong way round, but you know what I meant.
Did you?
Yeah, I said having ADHD is the perfect career for a hairdresser.
Oh, rightio. Yeah, okay. No, see, I missed that. I just got the context. Yeah, so like being a hairdresser was perfect because one, I wanted to talk constantly. I love to engage with people. I had a lot of energy. Like I could work 12 hours and then come home and still go out and do stuff. I could work on the motorbike, talk on the phone to you for hours. Like I could do any of those things. So, but the extrovert part of me and the ADHD, the sensitivity, it worked really well as a hairdresser
Mm,
because I had some really like crazy experiences as a hairdresser. And so, like, one was, I realized that I could feel other people. And so I remember Naomi, I don't know if I already shared this or not, I may have, but there was a woman walking across the road and I just said to her, "Oh, make her drink. Well, I can't remember if it was a tea or coffee. Set her up down in the other corner. Grab some tissue. She's broken up with her husband." And Naomi looks over at me and she goes, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And I said, "Just trust me, it's happened. I can feel it in her body." She goes, "No, you can't." Okay. Anyway, woman walks in. Naomi says, "Hi, how are you?" She's like, "I broke up with my husband." And just went straight to tears. And she just looked over at me like, "What is wrong with you?" And so it became this
mm,
thing, but I started to use it as a hairdresser to actually serve my clients.
mm,
So when they would come in and they would ask for something, I could actually I could actually feel what they really wanted.
mm,
And so I started to use that in how I communicated with women. It actually helped me to understand like how women were communicating. And
mm,
quite often, men are always so curious. Like, I don't understand what my woman means. She says one thing and she does another, and this and that. And it's It's a really beautiful part of a woman,
Mm.
and she communicates in a really specific way. So it like I understood all this, and it was really, yeah, being able to feel what was happening in a person's body, and hearing their words and recognizing the disconnect between what they were asking for and what was happening in their body. I could then recommunicate back to them in a way that actually touched what they were feeling in their body. Like, yeah, that's what I want. I want that. What you just said. It's like,
Mm.
okay, cool.
So it
So
influenced the way you would cut their hair and communicate with them about their hair. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It started. I don't know when. It was years and years ago, but
Mm.
I had a woman come in, and she was blonde. Now, blonde people who have blonde in their hair, they do not want any orange or yellow in it. They
Mm.
want clean blonde. In general, this was back then.
Yeah.
Trends change. I have no idea what's happening right now, but so she brought in this picture of Al McPherson, and in the photo, like her hair was actually quite orange and brassy, which was quite common, but then blonde on the ends. And she said, "I want this color," and I looked at it, and at first I was just like, I was like, "No, you don't." She goes, "Yeah, I do." And I go, "It's orange." She goes, "No, it's not. It's blonde." I'm like, all right, let me get the color chart. So I went and I grabbed the color chart and I grabbed the color swatch and I put it right up against that. And I go, "Is that the color?" And she goes, "That's exactly the color." So I removed the color thing, whatever the book was called. I can't remember. My brain's not thinking.
Magazine.
But yeah, it comes with the color brand. And then I held it up to her forehead and she goes, "Oh, I don't want that." And I was like, "That's right." So we're both looking at it, and I'm a little perplexed at this point. And she's looking at it. And she goes, "Yeah, but I really want that. I don't understand how it can be so different." And so I'm looking at her, and then I'm looking in the mirror, and then I'm looking at the picture, and then I was like, "Oh shit, I get it." And so Elle was actually in a bikini, laying on the beach under a palm tree next to a turquoise blue water.
Mm.
And I was like, it was a gorgeous photo. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, okay, she feels relaxed, like surrendered. She feels like she looks sexy and she looks sensual.
Mm.
And it was like, okay. I'm like, oh, she wants to feel like what this picture is portraying, the feeling
Mm.
of this person. And I'm like, okay. So I just sat with that for a few seconds, and she's like, what are you thinking? I said, just give me a minute. I think I've got this. And so then I just said to her, how would you like, do you want me to do a color and a cut that actually, so that you feel like, soft and sensual and relaxed and just, that real casual kind of sexy? And she goes, oh, yes, that's what I want. I'm like, got it. Right. Cool. And it, I learned something really specific in that moment. And it's what helped me to understand women, because women make perfect sense to me. And sometimes I find men really confusing. But what I realize is that women are always communicating from a place of how they feel,
Mm.
which is why it seems, irrational sometimes to men, or say one thing and do another, because what they're really doing is communicating like from that feeling space of like either I want to feel or how I feel.
Mm. Mhm.
Like quite often, men will complain about, oh, 1 minute she says she hates me and then she says she loves me. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's like, no, that makes perfect sense, because you got
Mm.
to add I feel in front of it. So in that moment, she feels like she hates you because she's hurting so much. Whatever you've said or done is causing her so much pain. Then, possibly he's apologized or whatever. In the next moment, now she feels so much love and gratitude for his awareness and for seeing her. And that's the shift. It's all rooted in the relationship to the feeling state.
Mm.
And the communication, once I understood, was coming from there. Each client that came in, if they had a picture, if they didn't have a picture, I'd ask them, let's just have a look at a couple of pictures, because I could look at the picture and I could feel, the feeling that picture was portraying.
Mm.
And it was like I was using that sensitivity to feel that. But then I'd look at them and look at their face, look at their hair, feel their body. Like, what is it that you want to feel coming from
Mm.
this? And like, what I loved about being a hairdresser was making women look and feel beautiful. So they'd
Mm.
walk in one way and then walk out just glowing. And seeing a
Mm,
woman glow is a really beautiful thing. But to have a role in creating that for me was just divine.
mm,
And that's like, I adored that about
mm,
being a hairdresser. And so understanding that process of how a woman feels and communicating from that space, that changed my understanding. And so then what happened was I could really deeply understand what my client wanted and what she
mm,
needed from me in that moment. And so then it was a really, it set up a really beautiful relationship and dynamic, and it
mm,
allowed me to touch them more deeply with what I had to offer. And created like more love for me in the experience of being a hairdresser, of being able to meet them and to bring that quality that they really desired,
mm.
what they wanted to experience and feel about themselves.
Beautiful. And I've seen, even, being in the salon, how much the women really appreciated you as a hairdresser. And even when you weren't able to hairdress anymore, the number of women who still wanted you to be able to cut their hair.
Yeah, that was, you definitely wouldn't want me coming at you with my shaky hand and scissors, and
No, no.
I wouldn't even be able to. Yeah, yeah, no, that would be bad.
I imagine over 30 plus years of being a hairdresser, you would have been present to a lot of relationship conversations, how women felt about their relationships,
Mm.
what was challenging them in their relationships, what they wanted to be different. So how did that serve you, all of those relationship conversations over many years?
In many ways, it was, that was the other thing that I loved the most. Like in some ways, like that they were on par. Like
Mm,
the thing, even like from a young man when I was 18, like it was the it was the relationships that I loved. I loved being able to sit there and talk to people about how they felt, what was happening for them, their connection in their relationship. And like when I started hairdressing, people didn't go to counselors or psychologists or psychotherapists. Like, when I was started hairdressing, which is actually in the 80s, it was like, only crazy people spoke to counselors or psychologists. If you had something going on, you spoke to your hairdresser. And so for me, I started hairdressing in that phase. That
mm,
was definitely shifted by the time I finished, but that's where it started. And so much of it for me was the talking about relationships.
mm,
And so like that's part of, I think, how all these things just came together. Like I would be studying intimacy and relationships and spirituality and spiritual healing, all kinds of different concepts and modalities while I was hairdressing, but then applying those principles to who I was, and I showed up to those people. So hairdressing for me in some ways was a really deep journey. I
mm,
thought I was, making women look and feel beautiful, but really what I was doing was learning to, I think, understand them on a really deep level and to love and appreciate, who they are and what they have to offer in their full power. Like a woman's feelings and who she is, it's so rich and so beautiful. There's so much, oh, there's so much available in that, like
mm,
for a man to help us become more aware. Like there's so many gifts that women bring, but in our culture, we tend to diminish those and write them off and make them small or wrong or irrational or crazy or all this sort of stuff. And it's just not true. All that behavior and things that people judge as or criticize or make wrong is actually, it's rooted in something that's really really beneficial for men, for their growth, for consciousness, to help people become more aware. It's just not understood well enough, the beauty and the gifts that are available through a woman's emotional experience
mm,
because of her sensitivity and how she feels the world. She can feel things that are happening in a man that he's not aware that he's feeling or that are happening, and that can help a man become more conscious. He can
mm,
become more aware through her sensitivity. He says just the slightest thing that's off, that's not in alignment with his values or who he says he is as a man, that'll cause pain in her body. And she'll be
mm,
at him straight away. Don't speak to me like that, or don't say this like that. And part of that gift is that sensitivity saying, hey, you're not being the man you want to be in the world right now. You're not being who you said you are. This isn't you. And I love you. And I love you enough not to let you keep being someone you don't want to be.
mm,
That's just a small example, but there's so much richness and beauty if we start to love a woman for her emotional state, exactly who she is, how she is, whatever that looks like. It's a
Mm.
really, there's a so much, oh, God, I could talk for hours, but there's so much beauty and richness available in that.
Mm.
And to understand that deeply is to really love somebody exactly as they are.
Mm.
And that's a beautiful gift to give somebody.
Yeah, and being witness to so many women, like in that role as like hairdresser, but then also the person they're confiding in. There must have been, yeah, just richness after richness of witnessing women going through whatever challenges they were going through in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it was a real privilege and an honor to be able to hold that space for those people that wanted to share and be open and be vulnerable. And I also tended to have a lot of clients that were high level psychologists or psychotherapists or counselors, like people that trained other people. Like I tended to attract clients like that.
Mm.
But the conversations that we have would be amazing. Like
Mm.
I would learn so much,
Yeah.
from their experience, and sharing my experience that was, that of what was happening, in relationship and dynamics and what I could see. It was like, yeah, it was really beautiful.
Mm.
But I think part of the gift too is the cross section of humanity that you
Mm.
experience. Like not hairdressing anymore. It's like life's really small in terms of the world around me and the people that I see and interact with. But as a hairdresser, I see people from all cross sections of life, from multi millionaires and right down to people who are on the dole or poverty stricken and everything in between. Like there's
Mm.
such a rich diversity there, and it's such a beautiful place to learn and to
Mm.
experience humans, because there's so you get exposed to so much variety of
Mm.
people's experiences, like so many more experiences than I could ever have in my own life.
Mm.
And to learn and grow, with them through their experience, and for me to make changes when I see and hear and feel something in someone. It was like, in some ways, it was like being a hairdresser is like a deep spiritual practice. It
Mm.
was really beautiful because I learned so much from other people and allowed their experience to change my life.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful. So let me just check my questions here. Okay, let's see. So it feels like relationship conversations, exploring relationships has been quite predominant in your life. Could,
Mm.
could you say how important relationships have been for you?
Yeah, it's always been really high, like
Mm.
on my list of values and priorities. Like right from a really young age, my first proper girlfriend that I was really in love with, and I really did love her, and I loved her mum actually as well, but not in that way. Just I'll expand on that a little bit. um, we were fighting one day and arguing, and she said, "Oh, I think we should go and talk to my mum." And like, I was a hothead as a kid. I'm like, I'm not going to talk to your mum. I'm having a relationship with you, not with your mother. She goes, but my mum's a counselor. And I said, I'm not fucking crazy. Just like, I'm like, I'm not doing that, right? She did. So anyway, we fought back and forwards, and of course, we went and saw her mother. And so, what started off for the first hour as her, counseling between the two of us, and then that kind of finished. And for another 3 4 hours, I think I was there for like 4 to 5 hours in total. Her and I just sat and talked.
As in
Her mum,
her
I won't
mum.
say her
Yeah.
name, yeah, but I nearly did. But her mum and I just sat there
Yeah.
and talked. And like for me, it opened my eyes to the world of feelings, and then specifically emotional feelings and relationship. And that started the journey, I think, for me. And that was right. Like I started hairdressing at 17, and I met her through that. She was becoming a hairdresser as well. And so, yeah, I would have been 18, 19
Mm.
when I first met her mum. And so that experience with her, I just realized there was so much growth available in intimate relationship. And so I think 10 years later, like 28, I was still like talking to her mum regularly, and
Mm.
like, having, like, we would be sitting there talking with each other, and then somewhere in all that, I would hold space for her feelings. Like, it became a real, like, mutual
Mm.
shift between each other. Like, I somehow learnt to hold space, like, through that, for emotions and feelings for another,
Mhm.
through learning how to hold them in my own body, and through her skillful guidance. So
Mm.
that, experience also translated into the hairdressing and being interested in the relationships, because here I am, speaking, I've got this access to, like, I reckon I was spending like 3 or 4 hours a week just diving into everything in my childhood and
Mm.
all this sort of stuff with this woman. And then communicating with clients, I could see the parallels and the similarities, and I could
Mm.
understand, and then have a deep conversation about that experience someone's having, and offering mine and what I'd been gifted through her to people actually really served them. So my clients that I attracted tend to be more sort of deeper, and looking for that connection, and those types of conversations.
Mm.
And so the relationship piece was really strong from
Mm.
that age.
Yeah, and so learning about emotions and how that works in the body as such a young man, did that change the quality of your relationships?
Yes and no,
Mm-hmm.
because the the beauty of it was I became really aware.
Mm-hmm.
I was sensitive, to my feelings. I could be sensitive to another person's feelings, but I couldn't always live the awareness that I had. So I was really emotionally aware
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what was happening in my body, but then I couldn't actually embody and live what I knew to be right.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So, like, I'd
yeah.
know, like, this is the right way to be. I know what's happening in my body. This feeling's arising, that feeling's arising. This is sitting underneath that. That's sitting underneath that, and I would still react and behave like a dick.
Yeah, right.
Does
So
that make sense?
yeah, yeah.
So,
So you knew a better way,
but
but you couldn't fully live and embody it, which is its own
100%.
version of torture.
It was, yeah. And so here I was, this person who had all these awareness, but then I couldn't live it or apply it skillfully.
Mm.
There was a
Mm.
real gap between being aware of how I feel, being able to feel how I feel, but then being able to actually put that into action and change how I live as a human, as a man.
Mm.
And so in lots of ways it caused a lot of frustration, and it
Mm.
caused a lot of hurt and pain, because I knew a better way to be, but quite often I couldn't live that.
Mm.
And that created a lot of really destructive self-talk,
Mm.
like like abusive self-talk
Mm.
of, like, you're not good enough, better than this, and you should be doing this differently, and how can you know all this and fuck this up this way. It's just like really strong self-abusive kind of dialogue, which would create such an intense pressure
Mm.
inside my body, which inevitably then I'm going to explode again at some point and
Mm.
react and not be able to behave skillfully.
Mm.
So I kept perpetuating this cycle of, as soon as I'd act angrily or react poorly or say something stupid, or do something dumb, then I would immediately start the self talk, and that whole process would begin right there in that moment.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
do, say, be whatever the wrong thing. Next thing I know, I'm starting that process immediately by
Mm.
beating up on myself, creating guilt and shame, not good enough, you worthless piece of shit. How can you do or say these things? And just really beating myself up, because I was aware that there's such a different way to be.
Mm.
And so it was, in lots of ways, this torturous devastation, but it
Mm.
didn't seem to help how much I would talk to someone, how much I understood the feelings. I couldn't change the behavior. I didn't have the skill.
Mm. The thing that keeps coming up for me listening to you now is that sense of destruction and heartbreak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I felt like I was destroying my relationships, but it was the thing I was most loved, like, as a man. Like, I was always really different to other men, like, really different. I never felt like I fitted in anywhere, yet I could fit in everywhere. So just to, if that makes sense, it's a paradoxical type ironic experience, but
Mm,
that's how I felt internally. But I could not, yeah,
mm, mm.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
horrible.
And I know there's a lot to dive into there, and we're almost at time for today. So I know that, yeah, next next episode we're going to explore more deeply some of that devastation, destruction, heartbreak in relationships for
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah. I had some really dark experiences. I did some
Mm,
really bad things. I behaved in really shitful ways
mm,
as a human, as a man, and it I really did wreak chaos and destruction in my own life and my partner's life.
mm.
Yeah, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
But it just was constantly me perpetuating that cycle and didn't have the
Mm.
awareness and the skill of how to step out of that.
Yeah, so next episode we'll dive into that more to hear from you how you learnt to break that cycle and what changes you made. Before we wind up today, I have this belief and I want to check in and see how it feels for you. It's like
Mm.
that when we're committed to a path of growth and learning and developing ourselves, I believe that each relationship can be an evolution on the prior relationships. What's your experience and thoughts on that?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So, yes, it can be an evolution if I can take what I've learned and live and become different, be a different person because of it. If I can't and I'm just aware that I've been a dick and I don't do anything different, my next relationship will actually be a de-evolution. Usually, what I find is there's a pattern of creating the same types of relationships that progressively get worse. That was my experience, and I think also what I see regularly with clients or with people is that there's a an experience that they keep having some version. I call it same shit, different shovel. It's like different scenarios and situations, but the same kind of drivers that are there. And I know for me, like after my last devastating relationship, when what we'll dive into, I had a really beautiful relationship, but that
Mm,
also didn't work. It was very healing. And after that, I just said, right, I am not having another relationship until I have the skills to create the relationship that I want,
mm,
because I was the one common denominator in every relationship that I ever had.
mm,
And that meant that there was something that I was doing, being that was creating these dynamics and these relationships. So if when I applied that level of attention to it, then yeah, the relationship, this one's clearly an evolution beyond anything I've ever had.
mm,
But learning the skills of intimacy and relationship and how to understand another human being, how to be with them in their intensity of their emotional experience, how both of us can grow through those challenging moments, it's not taught anywhere. I
mm,
know we teach it,
mhm,
but we had to go out and seek it and learn it and understand it. And it's really hard to find. It's not present in our culture, it's absent. It should be taught in schools,
mm,
like how to relate to another human, how to relate to your own emotional experience, how to be with another, how to actually grow as a human. What are the steps? What's the process? What does that actually look like in a human body? And so if there's some awareness around how to embody learnings, awareness,
mm,
understandings, different, becoming aware of our emotional state and being able to be with that without reacting to it and adjust. If we can make those kinds of levels of adjustments, we can have massive evolution.
mm,
But anyone can grow, anyone can create the relationship they want. They just have to be taught what that looks like in a human, how to do that, how to make adjustments, and how to actually make lifelong permanent change through how they be in the world.
yeah. And certainly the willingness to make changes needs to be at the core of growing. It's like
Yeah,
willingness to do something differently because, of course, if we keep doing the same thing, we keep creating the same relationships. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm,
And it's learning, what is it that I need to change or do differently?
Mm.
What do I need to become aware of about who I am or how I be, how I feel, what I say, how I react and respond to the world that needs adjustment to create a different experience in my body, but also in another person's body.
Mm.
And then what we start to do is we start to evoke the qualities of love and the qualities we desire in the world through how we be.
Yes.
And it's that will create lifelong change. Because
Mm.
if I be or say or do something that's different to how I did it last time, the person in front of me can't react or respond the same way.
Mm.
And so how they react or respond tells me how I'm being. If I'm
Mm.
saying something and it's just pissing people off all the time, there's something off about what I'm saying, about who
Mm.
I'm being in that moment. My awareness isn't wide enough. I
Yeah.
might see my point of view, I might feel like I'm right, and there'll be more to it that I
Mm.
won't see. And so using other people as a reference point for how I am, who I am, where I'm at in my journey is a really potent part of that change process. And that's that part of being willing to do something different. That's where that sort of becomes incredibly valuable. That's where
Mm.
we see life changing results, when we're willing to look at who we are, how we're being, what we're saying or doing, and make an adjustment. If we're
Mm.
willing to do that, there's no limit to where we can go, and it doesn't matter where we start from.
Mm. Which feels like a beautiful point to wind up today, so that next week we can hear more about your journey of destruction and heartbreak in relationships and the changes that you implemented to be able to turn all of that around and become the loving husband and life partner and co-creator in this beautiful sacred journey we're on.
Let's just say I've walked the whole path from the darkest dark to the lightest light and
Yeah.
everything in between. It's
Yeah.
been a big journey. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone for listening.